Part two of how, in just 4 days, the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department will be coming to lock me out of the home I have lived in for the past 23 years. As I left off, my ex spouse became a state of California employee. And after they became a state of California employee and they were employed, and I thought that a lot of the issues that the marriage was experiencing would subside. Little did I know that I was fully and definitely wrong. It was still a lot of me shouldering the burden of many, many things, primarily dealing with the issues that came along with supporting my child and the spectrum issues, being the only parent advocating and fighting for the rights and justices that had to do with making sure that a biracial child with disabilities received the support that they needed through the education system. And it just wasn't happening. So I continued to fight and continued to fight. And as I continued to fight, my child was being suspended more and more often as a punishment for me. Now, I started working with the teachers and the schools and trying to get them to understand the help that I needed as a full-time working mom who was in charge of teams. It was very difficult for me to be leaving my job every day to go home because my child was suspended. And when my child is suspended, I'm suspended because I can't go to work. And being the only person who was responsible for that, it became a lot. So I started to recognize that if I'm going to be alone, I might as well be alone. And so I continue to state, I cannot stay here. I cannot stay like this. And I was very unhappy. And in trying to course correct my unhappiness, I needed a divorce. And at first I said, let's work through this on our own. We don't need lawyers. We don't need people in our stuff. We can do this. We came up with a plan of every other weekend. This kids would spend with him, and then they'd be home during the week, and things like that. We worked out a plan. He would pay, support me this much to help with the housing so the kids could stay in their home. And after a while, my spouse said, I think it's best, that I talk to someone else. I don't need to be paying you anything, honestly. And my spouse felt like child support was not something that he should be paying. And so that was the first step of a long divorce process. Let me say that. My spouse decided that because they worked for the state of California, they could get all of these services for free and it would not cost us as much. Little did I know that that was very, very wrong. So my being naive and trusting, I went with and I said, okay, you go ahead and file the divorce. Let's get it, let's do what we need to do. If that's, let's just figure it out. And that was my attitude a lot of times because I was working full time and trying to deal with the child. When he came up with I said, okay. And I just kind of went with it because I didn't think at the time that there was any malicious intent. So the divorce was filed and we went forward. And once it got down into it, the divorce was filed in a way where I would be paying spousal support and taking care of the kids and doing all of these things. And so it was shocking to me how it was written and put together. So I hired an attorney, and once I hired an attorney and found one that would represent me, the cost was $315 per hour for the cost of this attorney. As I was working and taking care of the stuff for my children and trying to do this, didn't realize that the state of California pays for their employees' legal fees. That's part of their employee perks. And so I start going through the divorce, and then we're in and out of court every other week. For me, $315 per hour. And this divorce went from 2014 to 2020. At one point, my ex-spouse started representing themselves and contacting my attorney 4 or 5 times a day and would call me and state, "You should be out of money by now. You should be out of money by now." And at the end of it, the divorce finally, once I agreed to shoulder the responsibility of all the medical coverages for the children and give them $15,000 and a few other things that they wanted. I finally just said, okay, it's bankrupting me. And my 40,000 versus free was really creating a big, huge imbalance. At one point, the judge ordered me during the divorce proceedings to apply for Social Security and disability benefits during the divorce proceeding, in which I did. But at the same time, I was still advocating and fighting for my child, who was still not getting the services they needed. I want to back up and say that also the school district where I was advocating for my child were all high school friends with my ex-spouse. They all were the same age, all the teachers, all the yard duties, all the staff, they were all part of the same high school alumni. Let me start by saying that, or end by saying that. And so once I realized that I was fighting not only internally, externally, trying to get support for my child, I started going a different route. I moved my child to a different school district, which was then from Folsom Cordova Unified School District to Sacramento City Unified School District. Once I tried to move my child from Sacramento City Unified School District, it became even more difficult because the school wouldn't accept my child, even though there were openings. That's when I started to realize there was more of a system against me, because all you know is my child's name. And so that told me that the school had already let the Sacramento City Unified School District know that my child was coming, and they pretty much prevented me from enrolling my child until I reached out to the Office of Civil Rights, until I contacted the superintendent of charter schools to fight for my child's entry. Excuse me. Finally, my child was admitted into the Sacramento City Unified School District after much fighting with the superintendent, the principals, the ombudsman. It was a fight, but my child finally got into the school. Once my child got into that school, I again started advocating for special education services. And that school denied special education services and refused to do anything to make sure that my child got the support that they needed. Because at that point, my child was becoming angry and agitated and just doing things like punching holes in walls and, screaming to the top of his lungs. Things that I had already experienced before in my marriage that I was not willing to hear or deal with in my child.